Today we will examine key concepts of message structure and evidence. By message structure, I'm referring to the decisions we make as we put together the various pieces of a message to create a coherent, persuasive message. This includes such matters as organization, argument ordering, and other things you see listed. By evidence, I'm referring to the different kinds of support brought forth to support the veracity of claims made. Let's begin with message structure. A garage full of automobile parts does not a car make. Likewise, a collection of arguments, facts, examples, and such does not a persuasive message make. The things we learn through our research must be assembled in an orderly fashion, and that's what we mean by message structure. Let's begin with the most basic structural issue, organization. For longer persuasive messages, the same rules apply that you follow when you write a term paper. Like a good term paper, you will need to provide an attention-gaining introduction. Your introduction should also include a thesis statement, which is a statement that summarizes your main point or points. You will want to reduce your ideas to a few key points, perhaps 3 to 5. Transitions will be needed as you move through your points. There may be many ways to organize these points. Your topic and purpose will probably make obvious your selection of an organizational approach. For example, a message that is best presented with regard to historical developments should follow a chronological organization. A message that addresses a problem would probably first define the problem and then argue for a specific solution. There are other organizational patterns to choose from as well, such as cause and effect and topical structure. The key point, however, is simple: be organized. There are two primary effects of good organization. First, your audience will be more likely to comprehend and remember your message. Second, you will be perceived as a more credible communicator if you are organized. Another structural issue you will need to decide is how many arguments should you present. If you have researched your topic well, you probably have more to say on it than most audiences care to hear. Some of your potential arguments will not make the cut. In marketing campaigns, the key argument for buying a product is often reduced to a single argument that can be presented in a slogan. Kellogg's Frosted Flakes argument is about taste. Tony the Tiger tells us that they're great. For the U.S. Army, it's all about self-actualization. Be all you can be. Bill Clinton may have won the presidency during a time of recession by focusing on the economy. His campaign staff had a huge sign in their headquarters to remind them that it's the economy, stupid, so they would not stupidly get sidetracked. In most situations, however, we will need to present multiple arguments to support our position. How many? Some research suggests that when an audience is not very involved in the issue we are addressing, they may be convinced more by how many arguments we have than the quality of those arguments. That is, a low-involved audience member might quickly conclude that you are correct in your viewpoint because you have a lot of arguments to support your opinion. However, when a person cares much about the issue, that is, when they are very much involved with it, the quality of your arguments is more important than the number of arguments. Another structural issue is this: should you present your strongest arguments first or last? There's no simple answer to this question, and the research findings are somewhat inconsistent. For example, if you're persuading someone face-to-face, and if they have the opportunity to ask questions along the way, you will want to get your strongest arguments out first. In addition, your strongest argument should probably be presented first if your audience does not know you well and is thus attempting to judge your character and your credibility. On the other hand, some research suggests that your strongest arguments should come last if your audience does not care much about the issue. In such situations, the last argument may be the one most remembered by your audience members. A better approach, however, is to have no weak arguments. Another issue you will need to contemplate has been researched under the heading message-sidedness. You could present only your side of the message, which is called a one-sided message. Alternatively, you could mention the arguments made by people who disagree with you and then try to refute those arguments. This is called a refutational two-sided message. As a general rule, a two-sided message that refutes your opponent's positions is more effective than a one-sided message that only presents your point of view. Why is this so? Because it is quite likely that your audience will at some point in time hear the other side of the issue. A two-sided message might prepare them to attack your opponent's positions. In other words, a two-sided message can inoculate your audience against the arguments that your opponents might use against your position. The fifth structural issue we will take up is repetition, repetition, repetition. In propaganda and advertising alike, it is assumed that people will need to hear the basic message over and over again for it to sink in. This is especially true for less important, low-involving topics, such as what cereal to buy. Adolf Hitler's minister of propaganda wrote, "The rank and file are usually much more primitive than we imagine. Propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious." Advertisers also believe in repetition. Consider insurance company advertising. Flo is on TV every day talking to us about Progressive Insurance. If I had $1 for every time I have seen the Aflac duck, I would probably have enough for a trip to Europe. And of course, we all know and love Geico's Gecko. Repetition aids learning and retention. Repetition works best if it is varied. Progressive Insurance Company shows Flo in a new situation every week or two. The Aflac duck commercials are switched out regularly. Geico's Gecko travels the world while repeating the same basic message. This is repetition, but it's repetition with variation. That's what works best. The final structural issue we will deal with comes at the end of your persuasive message. People are more persuaded by their own conclusions than by ones given to them. You may implicitly know this. If you have ever tried to get a person to think that an idea is their idea, you know what we're talking about here. We do know that people are more persuaded when they draw a conclusion than when the communicator draws the conclusion for them. Here's the hitch. That person may not be motivated to draw a conclusion. They may not care enough about the issue to do so. It is also possible that the person might be unable to draw the conclusion you want because the issue is complicated. For this reason, the general principle is to draw an explicit conclusion for your audience unless you are absolutely sure that they will be able to do this on their own and motivated enough to take that step. At this point, let's move on to our second broad topic in this video, evidence. Some people, in some walks of life, are recognized as experts so much that their assertions are treated as facts. Few of us have that kind of competence attributed to us, however. For this reason, we need to back up our claims with evidence. It is what our audience will expect of us. Evidence takes many forms. These include statistics, examples, and the testimonials of experts and ordinary people. Demonstrations can also be used effectively for products and services. Not surprising, there's good support for the claim that well-evidenced messages are more persuasive than poorly evidenced messages. But what makes a piece of evidence effective? First, it must be novel. Evidence that we have already heard is to some extent already registered in our current attitude. It is not likely to change that attitude. Second, evidence must be relevant to the issue at hand. Third, evidence must be believable. Thus, the audience will be most convinced by relevant and believable evidence that has not been previously heard. The effects of evidence on a person depends on at least two factors. First, a person will be more influenced by your evidence if you are attempting persuasion on a topic about which they know little. In such situations, your evidence is likely to be novel to them. Second, the quality of your evidence will matter most when your audience cares about the issue. This is because they will be more likely to think about the evidence you have presented. Use of quality evidence has two effects that extend beyond immediate attitude change. First, a well-evidenced message is more likely to lead to persistent attitude change that lasts over time. Second, use of quality evidence can strengthen your audience's perception of your own communicator credibility. In this video, I have attempted to provide an overview of research on how to structure and evidence a persuasive message for optimal impact.